So then I eke out my existence that way another little bit by borrowing money from my brother, who I will never be able to pay back. Then I realize I can't keep doing this. I have all these cases, and the sickest idea occurs to me because it's the only path I could think of. Everyone is going to go, obviously, and forever. There are some mental health problems, but the best I could come up with was to go to Boulder and expletive with the Ramsey house. Start it on fire. You think I don't want to go to these jails, which are rougher, but if I go burn this place down, his response, I'm so glad you said that because that reminds me, part of the logic of doing this drastic thing to start the Ramsey house on fire, because it occurred to me that I've been to some of these other jails, even if only briefly. Boulder's jail had a carpet. You can see on the bulletin board there is a movie on Friday and Saturdays. There is popcorn and Pepsi. The interviewer states, so it's a jail for rich hippies. His response, my future is I'm going to jail, so I'm going to choose the nice one. So I go up to Boulder, make all my cases be controlled by living in the Boulder jail. I start the Ramsey house on fire. I don't really get it going. I sit out there for hours and hours on their patio. I look into the garage and see Ramsey Christmas on boxes. Which, when you're looking at a house like that and see that, oh my god, it's so weird. I want you to talk about being freaked out at the prospect of going to a rough jail, so you think I'm going to take control of my future. It's an interesting question. His response, it's just life itself, as in I can't keep borrowing. I hate it. It's expensive for my brother. I have to end that. I don't have a phone. Cell phones weren't prominent then. How am I going to go get a job? I'm all over the news. I don't have a place to be called at. How am I going to go to all these court dates? The future with just these misdemeanor charges is very bleak as it is. Now I'm suddenly in the media for these morgue logs, which bleeds into I'm somewhat of a Ramsey suspect. To be fair, logically, you were never a Ramsey suspect to a rationally thinking person. His response, I felt secure in that myself, but that did not stop a lot of people from thinking that. And why shouldn't they? And I've just been greased over their faces for like the last 2 months, in town anyway, for weirdness in the mortuary business. And then it's like, aha, look at this guy, and the word suspect was used in some papers. This is the price we pay for our system. His response, now I'm in jail and I'm just thinking, okay, just a little rest here and I get out of the jail within half an hour. But I've got nowhere to go. I eke out another week or two on my brother's dime, and then I realize that I'm in no mental health way able to get a job. I don't look like a person who should be hired. I am so corpseified myself. I look like a person who has been using speed for 5 years because of the stress of the last 2 months. Who is going to hire me? No one. And I have no way to be contacted or anything. It's impossible. I decide I'm going to start my inevitable jail time now. And I went up to Boulder. I had somewhere around $10, some of which was used to get up there, about $2.50 for bus fare. I sat around in the Pearl Street Mall for a while in front of Access Graphics, where Ramsey worked. I bought a soda and a hot dog. Weirdly, that was so important to some people. What did I do? Then I found a Manson-type girl, a very dirty, hippie, mean girl who was talking to me. And I told her my story, and I told her to come to Boulder to start the Ramsey house on fire. And she made damn sure I knew where it was. She walked with me for close to a mile, then she told me this way, that way. I mean, this does sound like some kind of movie plot. Was she attractive? No, she was a dirty mess. She was a Manson-type girl and not Marilyn Manson. Well, that's a less cool than that could have been, but keep going. This is an interesting interviewer here. She could see I was deeply serious. Did she know you were serious? She knew I was serious. I believe I had articles and things and I showed them to her. You had them on you? In my bag. Very John Fonte of you. Do you know John Fonte was from Boulder? Never heard of him. Famous author. He wrote about doing much the same thing, but go on. We sat at a picnic bench, and then she told me the rest of the way to the Ramsey house. She drilled it in. She made sure I knew it was very important to her. Interviewer laughs. He continues. I bet she bought a paper the next morning, so I made my way to 15th Street where the Ramsey house was, and I did not see it. I passed by it the first time. There were about 3 houses down, a woman raking. I asked her. She kind of sighed with disgust, but she was polite and pointed it out. She was sick of being asked that. It was broad daylight, say about 4 o'clock in the afternoon. Other cars did come and take pictures. 2 tourist girls parked a car and got out and looked at the house with me, and I talked to them. This is when the sun is up? He responds, I don't do anything on the Ramsey property because of this. There are people driving around looking at this. But the 2 tourist girls, black and white college girls from out of town who came to look at it, we chatted briefly for a minute about the case and the freak show, all of that. Then they told me some of my story, and they became very uncomfortable, and one of them took a picture of me. I don't know if he meant to say he told them of his story. Was it ever published? No. If the internet was bigger then, she would have posted that somewhere. Now you just posted it and off it goes. But anyway, she was like, do you mind if I take a picture? And she took it right away before I could even answer. Then they left immediately. I made them so uncomfortable. I don't blame them. Then I went to Chakataka Park. The interviewer states, I'm published at Chautauqua. He responds, I guess ignoring that statement from the interviewer, and I'm sitting there smoking a cigarette at a bus stop. Luckily, there's an extra lighter laying there, knowing what I'm going to do. I wait until dark, roam around, then I come back to the Ramsey house and I go up and down the alley and up and down around the front. In the alley, there's a big area by the fence where you can drive cars in and there is no gate on it. It's big enough that 2 cars could drive in there at the same time. A huge gaping hole in the fence. So I enter the property that way. And I look around through the windows, peep through the windows. Then I sit on the patio furniture and move one of the chairs so I can look at the house more. And I just sit there smoking cigarettes, totally miserable. This is so stupid what I'm about to do. I know it, but I also cannot think of a different plan. I mean, what am I going to do? If I call my brother for some more money, wait, what, another week, and then I'm back where I started. So I'm determined. Oh, and by the way, some neighbors saw I was sitting out there, and they did notice that I moved a chair and was staring at the house. But they thought I was some kind of security because I wasn't doing anything but sitting there and staring at the house. I go into the crevice between the garage and the house, and there are Ramsey things and they have nothing to do with me. That lights up my brain from the glowing worldwide frame of the whole thing. Like when I look at that window and see the spiral staircase, it's like a little stroke of something like, oh my God, I really am here and I'm going to do this. Same thing when I look in the garage. The back of the garage has windows on it. I look in there and see boxes and boxes labeled Ramsey Christmas, and I wonder who boxed that up. The police? The Ramseys? Interviewer states, so this is the moment where you take back control of your life. You're lighting this place on fire where someone killed a little girl. You have nothing to do with it. Probably demonstrably have nothing to do with this, but you're internalizing this is the way most people won't because it's time for you to now seize control of your fate. He responds, and even up to that moment, I'm not any kind of expert on the Ramseys, which I kind of became later in jail. I was doing my mortuary jobs and running around town and all of that before, and being a person who lived in Denver with time on their hands with the job. So I'm sitting on the patio and I decide this is so miserable and awful, I can't sit here forever, asking myself if I'm really going to do this. And I review the fact that I have nowhere to go, nothing else is sensible, I am going to jail, and I want to go to jail in Boulder. Why do you want to go to jail in Boulder? Because it's a young college town jail, without the hardened criminals and everything. I've only barely seen it, but I have seen it. It's clean. If I'm going to have to go, I'd rather go here. So I do this. I commit a felony by arson and make it so buses will come and take me to my court cases in the future and all that. I was never so relieved. I mean, the rest of the night was miserable. I ended up calling the police on myself. Were you worried about, in particular, that inmates might not hear you out and might just read the papers and be like, you might be expletive up, you might be expletive little kids, and not hear you out when you say I'm basically goth? Well, I'm going back to the beginning, the Denver City Jail. I always called it the Pringle Can, a very bad atmosphere jail where there is no air. They knew. I was ordered released, but they didn't let me out until they got together with the other municipalities. Interviewer states, and these other municipalities had to have their stay. I got a personal recognizance bond. It takes forever. By forever, I mean 2, 4, 6 hours whenever they feel like it, but I was there for 2 more days. Okay, so then at some point you are literally held. He interrupts the interviewer here. My point for that was going back to that. I'm crawling the walls like, why am I still in here? I got a personal recognizance bond. More detectives came and interviewed me there, and they acted like, we're surprised you're still here. And I'm like, you lying mother expletive, you know you kept me here. When I get back to my cell, I get released. I get back in my suit coat. I looked ridiculous compared to everyone else. Going down the hall, someone unseen to me said, man, how'd you get corpses into Safeway? I'm too far away and almost out the door for conversation, but they knew something about it already. But they think I'm abusing a corpse in Safeway, on the ground, expletive, a corpse. Interviewer states, it's a macabre game of telephone, but you get let out and eventually they process you back in and they don't let you go for about how many years? For that, about 2.7 years at Boulder after the arson. That's a very specific amount. Take me back to when you're processed in for this. For the arson for the initial 3 years. The arson itself was they had an in and out mailbox. I reached in there and felt they had a cabinet in there, but that is all. From the Jonbenet house. From the street, harshly zoomed in, the best they can do, a National Enquirer picture of a pack of matches. I left the tiny door on the mailbox open so that some air would get in there because it was failing the fire. I truly did intend to. I lied to the media afterwards when I said that it was just a tiny little thing just to get into jail. What I did could have started the house on fire. I did try. So you were taking one thing at a time. The first thing was burn the house down, then get arrested. I expected it to go up and for me to just be standing there like, yep. Wait, so he just put some matches in the mailbox and didn't... That's the fire? Well, okay. Tell us what happened. You threw some flaming stuff in there. What goes on? What are you throwing in there? Whatever I had that was paper out of my bag. Articles about me, the corpse thing, and I did have the paperback version of Interview with a Vampire. I've always equated Jonbenet with that little girl because of that Claudia. You know, that bitter little girl who is stuck in a vampire's body. She grows up into a 100-year-old vampire, but I'm a little girl, remember? I don't remember that part, but I'm going to rewatch it now. Okay, response. So I throw out page after page of that on fire in there. Books of matches, things like that. Maybe I don't know if I had some of their mail or whatever, but I did not stop anywhere and bring any supplies. You didn't bring any accelerant, no gasoline, no oil. No, I couldn't have afforded it. Not a thing. That march all the way from downtown Boulder to their house is a couple of miles. I didn't even think to bring any of the multitudes of papers anywhere, not a pile or a few. So I throw these things in there, I go to the back patio and wait and wait and wait. Then I went back and the fire hadn't taken. And I did it again. Nothing happened, nothing happened. Then I think I threw the whole matchbook in there. Then I left, went the other way down the street, went all the way back to downtown Boulder, just as miserable as you can get. As in, anyone who sees me, people would cross the street. Like, this guy has something wrong with him. And I sat on a bench in front of a cop shop, you know, those little mall things, and there was a cop in there. Then he came out and locked the door and went, "How's it going?" And he even looked at me like there is something wrong with him. If he just engaged me in the slightest bit, I would have told him what happened. Then I went all night long in misery. I've left this mess, and it's totally traceable to me. I wrote something on a matchbook or something, I believe. The next morning, I'm exhausted. You can't take this kind of depression and exhausting without wanting to get off your feet. I slept at a restaurant called Mustard's Last Stand on a bench out front. The interviewer states, "I've eaten there." Okay, Colfax continues, I called the police station and asked for either Detective Thomas or Gosage by name. Or, in any case, I asked specifically for the Ramsey detectives. I told them it was J.T. Colfax, and I was put right through. And this is at a time when idiots from all over the world are calling in like my neighbor did it, and they live in New Zealand. What did you say? Have you heard anything? And they're like, no. And apparently I did say, well, I've done it again. Kind of like in the Gilligan way of I've done something really stupid. And that was in every article and got really bad because they made it sound like I've returned to the Ramsey house and I've done a thing. I told them what happened. At the time, I'm in front of the granola shop. There is a Malamute tied to a street pole. And the owners put it there and it went inside. The Malamute does what it does, doesn't like it that they went in. He looks bored as can be, but he's howling. So this is the atmosphere. This wasn't happening when I dialed, and now that happens, and the cop is like, what is that noise? God, the luck I had. It sounds like I'm standing on a child or something and just killing it. It sounded horrible. Anyway, I tell them what I did. They said, we'll be right over, and a squad car came too. They all got there pretty much the same time. The squad car people put handcuffs on me. So that starts your 3 years in confinement? Yup, 2.7 years. I think Eric Parker's confinement was a lot easier to rationalize. They held him for years because he did X, Y, and Z, and it turns out he couldn't even do that, so they let him go. They held you for 3 years? Well, no, I was sentenced. You were sentenced to how many? Well, first it dragged on forever. 7 months go by and I get to court and it's an arraignment. I hated my public defender. I was like, arraignment? He claimed he told me that. I couldn't believe that my arraignment was 7 months earlier when I first went to court. He was like, you knew. I hated him. I asked for him to be fired. The judge was all like, maybe later. I was stunned that after something like 7 to 8 months that I'm still not even arraigned yet. I didn't know that. I thought I was. Because of the court appearance, which I was removed from, by the way. Why were you removed? So the next morning after, the fire, I go to court. You go to court, you get charged. The judge starts talking about the case, arson, etc. The public defender, who I've never seen, gets up and starts arguing about boilerplate expletive like a bond. I stood up and went, could your honor introduce me to that man who was talking about me? Which was like a needle being lifted off of a record. and there were reporters there, and that did get in, but they went, Colfax claimed that he never met his public defender. Like, I'm going to put on this show in front of the judge, and I really did talk to him for 5 hours. You had never met him? Never. Never even heard of him. Kerry Lackland. Everybody called him lackluster in jail. Everybody hated him. His reputation was well known. Boulder is a small place. For 2.7 years, meeting all these inmates coming and going, most people came for a few days or something. I used to deliver pizza to that guy. He's a huge drunk. And I would hear all these things about his house, like the house is just covered in crap. You never know whether to believe it. He did look like a drunk, though, and he was awful. I interrupted immediately and went, could Your Honor introduce me to that man who was talking about me? And he had to sit there humiliatingly and look at me and go, I apologize to Your Honor. I have not had a chance to meet the client. Then he looks at me and says, I am Kerry Lackland, and I'm from the Boulder Public Defender's Office. I've been assigned to your case. Did you ask for a new one? Not then. How long did it take? The media claimed I'd never met my public defender, but my public defender had to do this whole thing of saying, I'm sorry, Your Honor, so don't say claimed. Why not say the public defender admitted he had no chance to meet with his client? If your constitutional rights had been honored, you wouldn't have needed to. His response, but on the media front alone, to watch the way things got twisted in the media, who I always had a good relationship with before because they were doing art articles about me, like, say some bull expletive about your art, and it all goes fluffy and fine, or you have a bad feeling, to say, he claimed. This is the start of 3 years. Response, this is my first court appearance. It's for arson. The media is there, the stress is on, but weirdly I'm protected in a sense. Well, the court rattled me. That part, being gotten up to be looked at, to have my charges read in front of the other inmates was not good. But in reality, the next 10 days, I would say I was in a bubble like heroin. I felt nothing. I felt so at ease. I needed other inmates to go, look, you're on TV again, and I wouldn't even bother. I've never felt so relieved. I was totally relieved. It was an endorphin-style thing. People would say, you're so calm about what you're facing, and I felt nothing. Then you'd get filled with paranoia and inmate problems and all that. Although a lot of it was okay for a long time, there is nothing worse than being on the other end when you're at 2 years and 3 months, 4 months to go. Now it's very irritating. So after all this, a lot of railroading, you end up in jail. Response, so I'm in jail now, period. I'm an SMAN, special management. The public defender visits once or something, not much happens. 7 months go by, slight contact from him, maybe a letter here or there, but I don't even know that I'm not arraigned yet. It was just being in jail and letting it all go by. I'm taken by van from my comfortable Boulder jail to the other jails. I'm there for arraignments. I'm only in court for 5 minutes, but it takes me 2, 3, or 4 days, at least 2, to get back to Boulder, in which I've lost my cellmate or my single-person cell or whatever. It's agitating because I'm going to the real big city jails and living like that. At the worst of it, the intakes of things, I got put in with a very serious murderer who had been in prison for around 26 years. But he was up on a writ. I was in the writ pod of the Arapahoe County Jail. Pale as a ghost murder guy who was always talking about his case going, well, they say I bit her tits off. He's trying to scare the expletive out of me, and he is. Life goes on that way. I'm an SMAN for about a month, and they realize because of all the publicity and all that, and the weird charges, that is naturally where they put me. It's also segregated for snitches and stuff too, but no one thinks that of me. I got put into Gen Pop, and very first day when we marched down a hall to the chow hall was a big rack of trays. You grab your tray and go into the chow hall. When I was reaching for a tray, a voice from the line way back behind me with no way to identify who says something about, why did you kill Jonbenet, or child molester, or something. And I immediately turned into a whirling dervish of clown publicity, and it worked. You are a very well-educated man to know what a whirling dervish is. So while you're in there... Man, this interviewer is interesting. His response, this is a very important point, though. Now I'm out and about with the people, and it's the very first thing that happens, and I cannot have everyone thinking I'm a child molester. So what do you do from there? I make jokes, I steal every piece of police paperwork I can find, I send it to newspapers, and I mock them. I show the other inmates, look at what I did, and they're all going, tell them about the food. They're all suggesting things for me to do. So you have access to the ear of the media while you're inside. Yes, because of my previous art projects and because of all the noise of what was going on, so I published some things that are banal. The very first one, I get my commissary order list, and it says white power donuts on it. I ask someone and they say, oh, it's been like that for years. White Power Donuts. I get back in line to grab a different commissary list because I need the first one in order, and I send it off to Westward, and they put it right in, just this weird racial thing, but it's just a typo. But they're using your every mistake against you. Everything I can pick on the jail for, and sometimes Ramsey things, but anything. Notices that we're going to have sack lunches on Saturday because the Broncos are in the championship. It's just a dumb notice on a bulletin board. But me, I yank it off. Broncomania in this town, of course, this is going to get publicized. As in, the media needs everything about the Broncos they can get. And how about some weirdo, the weirdo? I'm very well known at this time, and mind you, I'm going on the radio from jail to a show that gets 120,000 listeners. It peaked with that show, and I was a regular there on all the time. They were always leaving me messages. Do you remember the name of the show? Peter Boyles. He is now a nut on KUNS. He's one of those right-wing Trumpy nuts now. Libertarian weirdo, but too far, as in out of his mind. The fact that I did these things and they would show up in the media, everyone in my surroundings in jail knew and were suspicious of my charges related to Jonbenet. That was the hardest time. The people in jail have some sleuthing going on in and out. You were never beat up for touching, in quotations, Jonbenet? No, I got into many fights, but it was more of a I hate your face type of thing. So not related to Jonbenet. Okay, what does everybody make of this Jason Arment article? So Jason Arment himself is a military vet. He served in Iraq as a machine gunner in the USMC. So this is how he conducted this interview with J.T. Colfax. So, I mean, every case, obviously, that has a lot of publicity, there are some weirdos that come out of the woodwork, but is the Jonbenet Ramsey case unlike any other in terms of this? I mean, here's a little article from the Denver Post. Colfax to be a Colfax free to be free spirit. July 14th, 1999. By Karen Aj. Boulder. The city's most famous transporter of the dead and would-be arsonists walked out of Boulder County Jail on Tuesday. So he got 3 years for attempted arson? I mean, how much arson was there actually? And got right to work at two of the things he does best, making himself a thorn in the side of law enforcement and making himself a public spectacle. His followers organized a mysteriously named 1,000 Noodle March to protest their view of Boulder justice and to celebrate the release of James Michael Thompson, better known to web crawlers and Jonbenet Ramsey investigation devotees across the country as J.T. Colfax. But the event, advertised on some websites, might have been more appropriately named the One Noodle March. Only a handful joined in the procession from Pasta J's restaurant, owned by Jay Alofsky, a friend of John and Patsy Ramsey, to the Boulder County Justice Center. Photographers and Boulder police who followed at a discreet distance far outnumbered the marchers. At the Justice Center, as confused passerbys looked on and news photographers snapped pictures, Thompson admonished Boulder voters to take the eel out of re-election. Wow. In an obtuse reference to Boulder County DA Alex Hunter, Hunter is considering whether to run for re-election in 2000. Thompson said he felt some obligation to speak out on behalf of Ramsey case followers and his former colleagues at the jail. He assured himself notoriety and jail time by ripping from a morgue logbook a page containing a notation of the December 26, 1996 death of Jonbenet. Colfax worked transporting bodies from morgues to funeral homes when he saw Jonbenet's name in the book at the Boulder Community Hospital. A month later, he went to the empty home where Jonbenet was found beaten and strangled, lit papers on fire, and shoved them through the mail slot in what he admitted was an attempt to burn down the house. According to police reports, Thompson spent the night at the house, then called a detective working on the Ramsey case and told him what he had done. What he did was get himself a 2-year stay in the county jail. While there, Thompson, as Colfax, penned a diary of sorts, a rambling concoction that was part a rare glimpse of life behind bars and part clearinghouse for the Ramsey case rumor mill. His letters were faithfully posted on his website. As he outlined for reporters his plans, a young woman walked up and asked, "Are you J.T. Colfax?" The woman held out a copy of Lawrence Schiller's book on the Ramsey case, Perfect Murder, Perfect Town, and asked the recent inmate to add his autograph. He obliged. I'm a very jaded person, but I'm polite, he said.